Hello and welcome to Author Hour. I'm your host Richard Lyntton, author of North Korea Deception and Hyde Park Deception, and coming soon, Leningrad Deception, now available on Kindle Vella. Today I would like to welcome local author Colonel David Kelly. David is a retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel who served for 30 years total on active services and in the reserves. He also taught high school social studies for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia in his 41-year career. His book, Hell in the Streets of Husaybah, is based on his journal notes and interviews with Marines and sailors that he compiled in 2004 while deployed as a senior Marine Corps field historian there. Welcome, Colonel David. Do you have this thing in the American military where you can keep your rank if you want to?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Once you've reached the rank, then that can be your title if you so choose.
And do you do that, or just for the book?
But just for the book, and just when I'm at a military base, things like that.
Right. So David, I think what I want to do is just give us a quick pen picture, because I know you were in the Marines, and then we'll talk about the historian element, which is kind of absolutely fascinating and something I didn't even know existed. Mm-hmm. So just give us a quick pen picture of your military service and career.
I got my commission in 1971 through Officer Candidate School at Quantico. Spent 3 years on active duty. There was a tour off the coast of Vietnam, not in Vietnam. It was on an amphibious group. And then got out, became a teacher, and then went back into the reserves and spent 25 odd years in the reserves, different staff billets.
What did you teach? History?
History, English, Spanish, reading, a few other things.
Okay, you just mentioned Spanish. I've got to just go off on a quick tangent. I noticed you were involved with something with the American-Spanish War. You did something.
Correct.
When you were a historian in the military. What was that? What was that war? Forgive my ignorance.
That was the 1898. The United States went to war with Spain, initially over Spanish or Cuban independence, and then we fought in the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Marines played a very tiny part of that.
Right.
And that was my research that I did to find out what was the tiny part that the Marines did.
Okay. So you were a Marine.
Yes.
In England, we call them Royal Marines.
Right.
And I remember when I was studying, Lyntton is the Royal Marines base in England on the south coast where they train the Marines, and you would see these Marines running along with like logs on their shoulders, you know. Mm-hmm. But I went into the army. I was cavalry. So just tell us, just for people, because maybe there's some younger viewers watching, what is the difference between regular army and a Marine?
Marines are very small. One thing that I found over the years is I run into other former Marines. We've all been at the same bases. We oftentimes know the same people. It's more of a brotherhood and sisterhood than the Army. And in the Marines, every Marine first trains to be an infantryman. Right. Every officer trains to be an infantry officer, and then they go to their specialized training.
So is it like, there's a similar thing in the British Army, is it like I think it's in the British Royal Marines. The officers train with the men, the other ranks, first. So you become that soldier first. Is that the same thing?
No, it's either through ROTC or Officer Candidate School.
Okay, so it's separate.
Separate. Okay. And it's actually in some ways more demanding than the enlisted.
Right.
The expectations are higher.
Right. Yeah. And so what made you, all those years ago, want to be a Royal Marines officer?
When I finished college, I thought if I had to go into the service, and the draft was still on back then, I'd prefer to be an officer. I talked to the various recruiting officers from the different services, and the one that was straight up, if you make it, fine. If you don't make it, we send you to recruit training with the Marines.
Okay.
So it was pretty much you make it and you do it, or then you spend your 2 years on active duty as an enlisted man. And
what made you, I'm always fascinated by people's different motivation. Like, I remember when I signed up, it was the Gulf War One. Yeah, that's right. I did Gulf War One and then Bosnia. So Gulf War One was looming, and I didn't really know that was going to be looming when I signed up. Mm-hmm. And I just remember, the sort of daunting aspect of going to serve in Gulf War One as a tank commander. What was your what was your original thinking, and what did you expect when you joined the army? Join the Marines. Sorry. I noticed the way he jumped in and just corrected me right in that. Point taken.
I thought if I was going to do it, I was going to do it straight up and just give it a shot, do the best I could, and hopefully make it through. It's hard to say. Some of my friends had gone through the training while they were in college. They encouraged me. So
you did the ROTC thing?
No, I did it. The Marines have a program called the Platoon Leaders Course, which is a summer course. I did the course, which was after graduation, which was Officer Candidate School.
Right.
And then I received my commission after that.
Do you, is there anything you regret about doing that? Do you wish you'd done something else? Or do you always, to this day, are you glad that you did it?
I was talking to my wife recently, and I said my officer commissioning was a bigger deal than any graduation that I'd been through high school or college. I said it was more pride. And I guess because it was such a small group of people that could do it. Mm-hmm. So that I felt that was something that was, I always look back on it and think I'm glad I did it like that.
Tell me, before we go on, I am curious about your thoughts on the war in Ukraine. I served, as some folks will know, I served in Bosnia and saw the sort of carnage of daily shelling in Bosnia. But unfortunately, I have to say, even Bosnia was sort of, Ukraine is Bosnia on steroids times 100 or 1,000. I mean, the death and destruction that we are seeing is extraordinary. I'm just curious, and I never thought we would see that, in Europe, ever, in the middle of Europe. I'm just curious, can you share any thoughts, just pure raw impressions of what you see and this war in Ukraine?
Just from what I've seen, it just seems horrific. And the bombing that the Russians are doing on civilian targets, just from all my training and when I was in Iraq, what the Marines were doing, they're very careful to make sure military targets, you were attacking enemy, not just randomly blowing up things. And it seems like what's happening in Ukraine is just randomly blowing up things just to create terror.
I mean, it is as bad, I think, as sort of Nazi Germany. Like it's just pure and utter carnage every day. Do you think we should be doing more?
It's hard to say. Yeah, we're doing a lot, I think. I don't know what more we can do besides getting directly involved.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether I would call it a proxy war, but I guess it is kind of, because we're giving weapons. But anyway, let's talk about this thing that you were. You were a military historian. Correct. And this incredible book that you've written, Hell in the Streets of
Husaybah.
So tell us how that came about, because I know you sort of came back into the re-enlisted kind of thing, but you were in charge of the whole history department first in the Marines. So tell us about what you did first, and then how they got you back to actually go into active service in. It was in Syria, right?
This was on the border with Syria.
The border. So yeah.
Well, my last 5 years in the reserves, I was with the History and Museums Division, which at that time was at the Washington Navy Yard.
Amazing.
And our mission was to train to interview Marines in the field. But in the late 90s, we did send people to Bosnia and other places where Marines were deployed.
So let me just jump in. So because I'm fascinated by this, because I remember doing, when I was in Bosnia, and in fact the BBC gave me a camera and they let me make a little sort of documentary. And I was amazed that they allowed me to carry this camera around. Who or how did that idea? Because when you're going to fight a war, the last thing you're thinking about is some historian documenting it all. Do you know who or why or how that all came about?
I think it came about during Vietnam, and Marines deployed some officers to Vietnam, and they did tape recordings of Marines in the field. And
so way back then.
Way back then, and then it kind of fell off a little bit. And in Desert Storm, they deployed several more Marine. They were all reservists that did this.
Yeah.
A lot of them had PhDs, history professors, civilian employees for different departments. But they were all Marine officers who had gone through regular Marine training, and then late in their careers, they were called in as field historians.
Right.
And I wasn't there to write history. I was there just to record Marines in the field. First-hand accounts.
But what was it you did at Quantico?
Washington Navy
Sorry,
Yard.
Washington. Okay.
Yeah, well, we would train to do that. I also, each member of the department, the field history unit, there were about 12 of us, would take on a research project. Mine happened to be the Spanish-American War. Wow. There were others who did explosions in Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines. Some went to Bosnia, and so we had a combination of doing research on old events and then doing current things. And I think the thinking was, I know for me, when I did the Spanish-American War research, I kept thinking, I wish I had more information. I wish somebody had talked with these people. I wish somebody had taken their accounts. So when I was deployed, that was always in the front of my mind, that I'm going to ask these things and I'm going to write them down and I'm going to explain it so that somebody 25 years from now will know what they're talking about. As you know, the military terms constantly change. Yeah. Even when I was there, I had only been out of the reserves for 4 years. There were terms that they were using that I had no idea what they were talking about, and I had to look them up. Right. So when I wrote it, I tried to make it that this would be understandable by somebody in the future. Yeah.
So just to be super clear, this was 2004, right?
Correct.
So this was kind of your turn to go back in the field. So were you worried? Were you scared? Did you have any extra training? Because by this time you've been out of the military for many
4 years. Yes.
Okay.
No, I felt, I think, exactly the way a lot of the Marines that I interviewed felt, was that I had trained to do this for years, and now I was actually going to do it. And it wasn't training, it was the real thing. Right. My family wasn't too happy about it, but my daughters talked to my wife and they said, this is what Dad wants to do. This is something that he...
But you weren't going into combat.
Not direct combat.
You were going into a combat zone.
Correct.
To do your military historian thing.
Yes.
You had a weapon, presumably, did you?
Yes.
So you had a weapon, so you could definitely protect yourself or even fight if necessary. Mm-hmm. But you weren't going again like to fight.
I wasn't frontline.
Fascinating that there's this role. You know, I guess it's like being the journalist being embedded with you know, with the military kind of thing. But I just, until I read your book, until recently, I just didn't realize that. Do the regular army have a similar position?
I don't know. I really don't know if they do.
I mean, anyway. So there you are. You're the official military historian, and you're going into the combat zones. So tell us how it was in reality, from how you perhaps expected it would be.
It pretty much was what I expected. I told my family I'd be at a headquarters and people would come to talk to me, but in reality, I knew that I'd have to go out and talk to the Marines because I wasn't embedded with any battalion or regiment. I had to make arrangements on my own to get out to the different units throughout Iraq. So it was, the mindset was, this is what I wanted to do. And when I first got off the plane in Baghdad, I looked around and I said, I feel like I'm in a movie. Right. It's so real and it's happening.
Wow. So, and again, just so everyone's clear. So what this is a account. Well, you tell us exactly, because it's not a non-fiction book. This is a series of interviews, first-hand, raw interviews. Just explain to us so everyone's clear what this is, what your book is.
Yeah, I would meet with Marines. Before I'd go to a unit, I'd contact the commanders by email. They knew what my job was, because the year before, the field historians had been deployed with various units and attached to them. Okay. I wasn't attached to any unit. I was myself and the major working with me. We had a free hand where we wanted to go. Fantastic. And so we would contact the unit, say, we're coming out, we're going to try to get there around this time. We'd like to meet with some people of yours who are significant. And even though I knew of significant events, I didn't go investigating them. I would go to the units, and the commanders would send them to me. Yeah. So there were.
So what? You're in a little tent somewhere?
No, it would be wherever we could. It was
porta cabin, or not even. It could be anywhere.
Some of the interviews in Husaybah were at Camp Husaybah, which later became known as Camp Gannon, right on the border with Syria. And it was just a cement block building. It looked like it had been a warehouse. Right. And I did the interviews sitting on a cot with the Marines opposite me on the cot. And then the next day I was back at a former train station in what looked like a train station depot room doing an interview there. Sometimes the interviews would be outside of a tent. So it was wherever I could meet with them. We sat down and did the interviews.
And how did you do it? With a recorder?
Yeah, there was a digital voice recorder. and that was new to me. The last time I had done it, only 4 years prior, we used the tape recorders, cassette recorders, and
so was that like Army issue, or did you choose?
it was military issue, Marine issue, and digital cameras, which again were new to me in 2004.
Oh, you did video too?
No, we did a still picture.
Okay.
I wish we had the video camera, because there was oftentimes when they'd be Marines would be pointing to a map and explaining something, and you lose that. But on the other side of that, sometimes I was in an area that was there was a secret classification for the map, and I couldn't take a picture of that, so I had to leave that alone. So it was voice recording and a digital photograph of each Marine.
So I'm assuming that folks warmed to you more than they would, say, a regular journalist. Tell us how people responded to you in general.
Very well. It was, I think part of it is, I was a lieutenant colonel, which was a higher rank than most of them were used to talking to. But I'm a civilian high school teacher. So I was kind of soft when I would meet them and kind of get them to open up rather than, sit at attention and address me as this and that. I think the approach I took was just tell me your story.
Yeah.
And the way I would do each interview, I'd ask them for a little bit of background, where they came from, why they joined the Marines, any experience that they may have had, and then it kind of just led into the story that they were going to tell. I asked very few questions. In fact, sometimes when I listen to the interviews, I think, I wish I'd asked him this, I wish I'd asked him that, but I just let the interview flow.
Let him go.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, in a way, it's sort of what I love about it is that it's sort of, traditionally you have your nonfiction history book, and it's, the author, famous author or historian writes, and it's sort of, but it's like, it's not firsthand. You were there firsthand in the area. Mm-hmm. What do you think? I mean, what do you think? What do you want to happen to what do you hope happens to all those interviews that you did?
The answer is simple. It's every time I sit down to write, I think of what so many of the Marines asked me at the end of the interview. They said, "Sir, what's going to happen with this interview?" And my stock answer was, "Well, it will go into the files at Quantico, and in the future, researchers will be able to use this." But then over the years, I found that researchers weren't using my interviews.
Right.
When this book came out, about a month after it came out, I got an email from one of the Marines that I interviewed, and in the email he said, "Sir, I want to thank you so much for telling my story." And that's what I want to keep doing, get these stories out.
Tell us about the Corporal
Dunham?
Jason Allen Sanders. That story where the soldier literally dove on a grenade.
Correct.
And then he basically saved Corporal Sanders' life, right?
Correct.
So he told you that. So I just want to go into this one story. I mean, there's lots of stories like this, but that's just one of the. I mean, it's extraordinary that the courage and the bravery and the craziness. I as an ex-military guy myself, and I was only a tank commander, so I wasn't like close combat fighting, urban areas like these guys, but the extraordinary sort of skill and talent and bravery. Just tell me about that one experience. I mean, did you understand, like, why was the do you remember? I'm sorry, the guy who died, the corporal who died was called Dunham, and he was honored posthumously, wasn't he?
Correct.
So what happened? Why was he originally because you said he got him to the ground, the guy. So there he is. They're at a checkpoint, presumably.
Yes, the vehicle checkpoint.
Tell us about that one episode, just to give people a flavor of what's in the book.
Yeah, I was interviewing Corporal Sanders, and he was a radio operator, and he was with a squad that were in Humvees. And while fighting was going on in the city, this was in the outskirts of the city, they set up a vehicle checkpoint, which was to stop vehicles, search them, make sure that there weren't people bringing weapons in or fighters into the city. And at this one particular checkpoint, Corporal Dunham was in charge of the checkpoint. He was in charge of a squad of Marines, which was about 11 or 12 Marines. And they'd set up the checkpoint, they stopped the vehicle, they got this guy out of this car, and then he started struggling. The man from the car started struggling with Corporal Dunham. And as they were struggling, according to Sanders' account, someone said, "He's got a grenade. I see a grenade." And a grenade fell on the ground, and the pin had been pulled. And Dunham took his helmet off, the helmet on the grenade, laid on top of that as the grenade exploded. And there were at least 2 Marines very close by. Sanders was there. And Sanders said he spoke with Dunham. He was still breathing, he was still alive, but he wasn't responding. And they had the Navy corpsmen come in and medevac Dunham. The Sanders said that everybody was stunned for a moment with the grenade exploding, and the insurgent who had tried to throw the grenade started running off, and Sanders shot him as he ran away.
Shot and killed him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to write this down, and I'm trying to absorb it while he's telling me this story. And then later on, I talked to another a first sergeant who talked about Corporal Dunham and what a good Marine he was, and how his squad looked up to him. And the night before that particular incident, he was up most of the night writing up his plan for what the squad was going to do that next day, organizing everything. And people oftentimes, as a military guy, you see these movies and you think, oh, they just jump into action, they do these things. They've rehearsed these things 1,000 times. It's not automatic,
rehearsed walking along a road, rehearsed moving into a building.
Yeah.
Just talk a bit. Yeah, please go on. That's fascinating too. So again, like you say in the movies, just and again, any details you can think of, you can go back to that checkpoint thing. But so what you're saying is that, you're not just in a base and you're not just standing there ready for the enemy to come. You literally explain to us how it works. They are going out into the field and doing these missions.
Correct. Dunham, the night before, he was writing up his plan for his squad. They do a 5-paragraph order, which explains everything that could possibly happen. All the details, where they're going to go, what happens if there's an attack from the right, from the left, what happens if there's an IED explosion, what happens if they encounter an enemy squad, how they're going to call in an airstrike or a mortar strike or things like that. Even when we left the railroad station to go out to the town of Husaybah, there was a corporal in charge of the convoy, and I was going to ride on the convoy. I'm a lieutenant colonel. The battalion commander was going to ride in the convoy. He's a lieutenant colonel. The corporal was in charge of the convoy. And the corporal briefed everyone in the convoy. Here's our radio frequencies. Here's what's the immediate action if we take contact right, contact left. Here's what happens if we hit an IED. Here's what happens if I get hit. Here's the alternate radio frequencies. And that was just for what I guess would be considered a routine ride from the railroad station to the town, a 25-minute ride. And any time I went anywhere, it was like that. It was very professional. It was never this off the cuff. Now, in actual combat, sometimes it would seem to be off the cuff, but again, they had practiced this. They trained for months before they deployed to Iraq. And even a lot of the Marines that I talked to had been in Iraq the year before in close combat. And so the veterans helped to train the rookies, the new guys.
Those corporals that we're talking about, they're like what? It could be 23, 24.
19 or 20.
Wow. See, that's what I find amazing. Talk to us, if you agree, just tell us a little bit about what I want people to understand is how much responsibility you get as a young soldier in the American Army and the British Army. That's what I always find amazing. Can you just, again, talk to us a little bit about that? And why that is?
Well, they're young, they're strong, they learn quickly, they're motivated.
Why do you think they're so motivated? Like why? Because they're like I remember the British a volunteer force for a start. But why do you think they're so motivated?
I think again, in my talking to a lot of them, it was several said, "This is what I joined to do." One corporal was in another area of Iraq. He said they were involved in a firefight, and he was sitting next to the Navy corpsman who was with him, and the corporal had said to the corpsman a couple of days before, I wonder what it's going to be like when I'm in combat. And that day, the corpsman said, well, now you know. This is what you were wondering, and you're involved in it, and you're doing it. And the pride that they had with what they were able to do and how they responded, that was always a question before they went into combat. Can I do this? I have the training, I have the rank, but will I freeze up? None of them froze up. The ones that I spoke to, it seemed like people just went into action. A couple of Marines even called it muscle memory. They said, we just did what we had to do. You just know what you have to do because you've trained to do it. It's not an off-the-cuff decision.
I think that's what's fascinating. That was kind of my experience as well in the British Army. It's like the way we work, and I'm talking about Western armies, is that you train so much, so it is a muscle memory. But then you see something like Ukraine, and what I'm fascinated by now, they are such hardened warriors now. Those guys, those artillery guys, the infantry. I mean, it's almost like it's a different level of sort of warriorship. Do you know what I mean? Do you agree? I
think so. Yes. Yeah. It's every decision is life and death in Ukraine right now, right. and they're up for it. It seems.
Yeah.
They've got a just cause, and there's no question in their mind that they're fighting for what they believe in.
But and also I find it fascinating. Like it comes about what you said about motivation. It's like you don't realize the power of the human spirit. Those young soldiers, those American soldiers, and those checkpoints. You think, well, why would they want to do that? Why would they want to be there? But it's that sense of pride. Or you tell me what you think it is.
Well, it's that, and also there were some other interviews that I did where they said, every day we do something important. Every day we're doing what we trained to do. This is why I joined the Marines, versus being at a camp back in the States and you're going out on a training exercise for 5 days and then you're coming home for the weekend. While they're there, they're fully focused, fully engaged, and it's what they joined to do. They're not painting rocks. They're not getting dressed for an inspection in dress uniforms. They're doing their job.
So how long were you out there for?
I arrived at the beginning of April, and I left at the beginning of August. So a little over 4 months of actually being in the field.
And did you have like some hairy moments? Any hairy moments?
The only one I had was in another place near Camp Fallujah. I was interviewing a Marine, and we were in this warehouse, and right at the end of the interview, at the end of the warehouse, which was maybe 75 feet from where I was, 3 mortar rounds hit. And the corporal just looked at me and he said, "Sir, you better put on your flak and helmet." Just another day in the office.
So wait, did it hit the actual shed that you were in?
It hit right outside the shed.
Right.
Right outside the shed.
Did you take cover? Did you sort of run and take cover?
I didn't know what to do, and he just said, "Put your flak and helmet on."
Right.
And in the interview, he had said, every couple of days, we'll get a couple of random shots on the camp. And it was just...
And what people have to understand is that someone could have been walking by that shell, right?
Yeah.
Someone could have died.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't know whether I've told this story on this show before, but when I arrived in Sarajevo, there were 1,500 shells a day landing in the city. I was a peacekeeper. And this is my very first night. And we're in this telecommunications building. And it's kind of rock solid because it's like Soviet era telecommunications building. And so we're in the dining hall, which is like on the 4th floor. And suddenly I'm sitting there and there's this massive bang. And I kind of got down underneath the table. No one else moved.
They just looked at you.
No one else moved. And I walk outside to the staircase and I see this window has literally been broken from this mortar which just landed on the roof. And it's just crazy. But anyway, tell us about the... got a little bit of time, a couple more minutes left. Tell us about the bookmaking process. So when did, and were you allowed to just go ahead and write this book? Did you have to get permission?
I did. What I did first was after 2004, when I had free time, and in the summers when I wasn't teaching, I transcribed most of the interviews.
Okay.
And
did you use software? Or do you
I just by hand. It was a Mac computer.
Right. So all the interviews that you'd done, you transcribed?
Correct. Yeah. Now, not all of them were word for word. Sometimes I just would listen and then, okay, I'm just going to put that in narrative form because people wouldn't understand what he was saying.
And you did this because you had to for the archive or because you thought, I'm going to write my book?
I just thought I'd do it. I didn't have any intentions of writing a book at the time.
Oh, okay.
But after a couple of years and then reading books about what happened in Iraq, I realized these interviews haven't been used.
Fantastic.
And some of the Marines that I talked to were interviewed, but years later by phone. I interviewed them within days of the events.
Amazing.
The events were fresh in our minds. So
amazing.
After about, I can say after about 5 years, after about 2008, 2009, I had everything transcribed. I sent it to Quantico, an electronic document, and I got the okay that these were all okay to use. Nothing was classified. There were no secret documents or secret parts of the interviews. So I had that document in 2009 that you can use these.
Wow.
And then in addition to that, I used my journal that I had to keep every night. I kept a copy of that. And I also used interview notes that I did while I was doing the interviews that helped me to write it. And then I guess about 2009, 2010, I started sending out inquiries to publishers, sent about a dozen out. Most times it was, this is not what we're doing, or we're not interested, or, no response.
And you found Casemate Publishers, which kind of specializes in this kind of stuff.
Yeah, indirectly. It was actually Savis Beatty Publishing. Ted Savis, who's out in California, he responded to me and he said, I might have a publisher for you. So he acted as my agent.
Yeah.
Savis Beatty does publish military books.
Fantastic.
And then he's the one that put me in contact with Casemate. And that took place around 2020, right before the pandemic hit. And then things kind of stopped for a while.
So are you working on another one?
Yeah, so there's a second one. It's right now.
What's it called? Do you know what it's called yet?
The working title is First Fights in Fallujah.
Okay.
And it's about the events in Fallujah in April of 2004. That's when I was there.
David, you'll have to come back on the show, when that comes out. I mean, there's tons more we could have talked about, but hope that gives everyone a flavor of what your book is about. Thank you so much for your service, David, and for joining us today on Author Hour. If you Google Colonel David Kelly, you can also find individual interviews not in the book online. Finally, and in honor of the Queen Elizabeth, the life of Queen Elizabeth II, please enjoy this non-fiction royal and local history series, which is a similar thing written by my aunt about my great aunt who traveled the world on royal tours under two Queen Elizabeths from cottage to palace. Is book 1 in the Worcestershire and Malvern history series. Cheerio, see you next time.